It's fascinating and a little tragic how people can crave the very thing they run from. The avoidant person is a perfect example of this. They crave love, connection, and understanding, yet when they finally get it, when someone truly sees them, they panic. And then there's the super empath, the one who loves deeply, listens intently, forgives quickly, the one who can sense emotional shifts in the air like weather. They don't just hear you, they feel you. And when these two people meet, the avoidant and the super empath, it's electric. It feels cosmic. But what looks like chemistry is often trauma chemistry. The avoidant is drawn to the super empath because deep down they crave the safety they never had. The empath's warmth feels like home, like peace, but also like exposure, because love for the avoidant is not safe. Love means being seen, and being seen means the risk of being hurt. So they take one step closer and then two steps back. They come near enough to feel loved, but not close enough to feel vulnerable. Meanwhile, the super empath feels the distance and starts working harder. They overgive, over-explain, over-forgive, thinking if they can just love harder, the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to stay. But what happens instead? The more the empath gives, the more the avoidant retreats. And that's when the cycle begins, the dance of chase and withdrawal. Now here's the paradox: the avoidant needs the empath. The empath's energy regulates them. It soothes the chaos inside. For a while, they feel calm, maybe even loved, in a way they never have before. But the moment that love becomes too real, too steady, too close, they pull away. Because that kind of intimacy triggers every alarm their nervous system has ever known. And yet, here's where it gets twisted. They can't let go either. They might ghost, detach, or criticize you, but they can't stop thinking about the empath. Because deep down, the empath represents what their inner child always wanted: unconditional love, safety, warmth. They're addicted not to the person, but to the feeling that person gives them, a fleeting taste of peace they can't sustain on their own. So they orbit. They come back when they're lonely, when they're empty, when they need to feel that familiar comfort. And the super empath, with their big, open heart, often lets them in again. Because empaths believe in potential, they see who the avoidant could be, not who they are right now. But here's the truth both sides need to hear. The avoidance addiction to the empath isn't love. It's dependency. It's the nervous system looking for regulation through another person instead of through healing. And for the empath, it's not strength to stay and fix. It's fear of letting go. Fear that if they walk away, the avoidant will finally heal. But without them, real love doesn't look like rescue. It looks like two people doing their own work, meeting from a place of wholeness, not survival. So if you're the empath in this story, remember this: you can love someone deeply and still choose distance. You can care without carrying. And if you're the avoidant, know that your fear of love isn't weakness, it's a wound. But wounds only heal when they're faced, not avoided. Because no matter how magnetic that connection feels, the only way it ever becomes healthy is when both people stop being addicted to the roles that keep them apart and start becoming the people who can truly stay. When two people are drawn together, it often feels like magic, but sometimes that spark is not chemistry, it's familiarity born from old pain. The attraction between the avoidant and the super empath doesn't come from balance or mutual understanding. It comes from emotional wounding that mirrors one another in deeply unconscious ways. The avoidant, often shaped by early experiences where love felt conditional or unpredictable, learned that closeness equals danger. They associate intimacy with losing control, so their nervous system responds to love with alarm. They crave connection, but the moment they feel it, they fear it. The super empath, on the other hand, is someone who has built their identity around attunement, reading emotions, soothing distress, and finding worth through care. They've often grown up in environments where they were rewarded for emotional labor, where being hyper-aware of others' feelings was a form of survival. Together, these two energies collide in a way that feels intoxicatingly familiar, as though they've known each other forever. To the avoidant, the super empath represents warmth, safety, and unconditional understanding, the very feelings they once longed for but never received consistently. When the empath shows patience, kindness, and emotional generosity, it hits the avoidant's deepest unmet need. They feel seen without judgment, loved without having to perform. but that same closeness also awakens buried fear, because being loved that openly reminds them of everything they've repressed, the longing, the vulnerability, the risk of being hurt again. So they begin to withdraw, not because they don't care, but because caring feels unsafe. The super empath, sensing the shift, doubles down. Their instinct is to give more, to love harder, to prove that love can heal. They take the avoidance retreat personally, believing that if they can just show enough patience or understanding, they'll earn lasting closeness. This is where the addictive loop forms. The avoidant is addicted to the emotional security the empath provides, while the empath is addicted to the validation that comes from being needed. Each person unconsciously plays out old emotional scripts. The avoidant creates the dynamic of reaching for love and then running from it, while the empath repeats the pattern of proving their worth through self-sacrifice. It's not love, it's recognition of pain. They see themselves in each other's wounds, and because that recognition feels like home, it's powerful enough to override logic. Even when it hurts, it feels right, because the nervous system is drawn to what is familiar, not necessarily what is healthy. Underneath the surface, this attraction is not about romance but repair. Both are searching for something they lost long ago: safety within connection. The avoidant hopes to find peace without exposure, and the empath hopes to find purpose without rejection. But until both recognize that this connection is rooted in unresolved trauma, they remain trapped in the same emotional dance. The avoidant keeps seeking control, the empath keeps seeking approval, and neither realizes that the true healing they're chasing must come from within themselves, not through each other. The dynamic between the avoidant and the super empath thrives on an invisible exchange of energy that becomes a form of emotional regulation. The avoidant, who often lives in a state of quiet internal chaos, finds temporary relief in the steady presence of the empath. The empath's calmness, understanding, and ability to attune emotionally act like a soothing balm to the avoidant's nervous system. For perhaps the first time, the avoidant feels a sense of safety that doesn't come from control but from connection. They may not consciously understand it, but they are drawn to the empath because that person provides emotional stability they've never been able to create for themselves. The super empath, on the other hand, feels deeply fulfilled by being that source of comfort. Their intuition allows them to sense emotional dissonance in others, and they instinctively step in to bring harmony. What they don't realize is that in doing so, they are slowly becoming the avoidant's emotional regulator, someone who absorbs and balances feelings that the avoidant cannot process alone. In this cycle, the avoidant's nervous system learns to rely on the empath's emotional consistency. When the avoidant is anxious, confused, or detached, the empath provides reassurance, warmth, and acceptance. It's like plugging into a power source. For a while, everything feels manageable. The empath listens, calms, and nurtures. The avoidant begins to relax, even open up a little. But as soon as the connection starts feeling too deep, the avoidant's old fears surface. Intimacy feels like a threat to autonomy. Vulnerability feels like exposure. So, to regain a sense of safety, the avoidant withdraws, sometimes abruptly, sometimes subtly. They pull back communication, create emotional distance, or use silence as a shield. The empath, feeling that sudden shift, experiences panic. The person they've invested in emotionally seems to be slipping away. Their instinct is to re-establish connection, to fix it, to soothe it, to make things right again. This push and pull creates an addictive rhythm for both. The avoidant experiences a temporary calm each time they connect with the empath and an overwhelming discomfort that drives them away when the connection deepens. The empath experiences a high when the avoidant opens up and a deep crash when they pull away. Both become locked in a cycle of emotional dependency, not because they want to hurt each other, but because they unconsciously use each other to manage feelings they can't manage alone. The avoidant depends on the empath's stability to feel grounded, while the empath depends on the avoidant's neediness to feel purposeful. The tragedy of this pattern is that neither realizes what's truly happening. The avoidant mistakes the empath's soothing energy for love, while the empath mistakes the avoidant's brief vulnerability for progress. In truth, what binds them is not love but emotional regulation, an unconscious exchange where one person stabilizes and the other is stabilized. It's not sustainable because it requires one person to constantly pour and the other to constantly receive. Until both learn to self-regulate, until the avoidant learns to sit with their own fear of intimacy, and the empath learns to tolerate disconnection, the cycle will repeat. The bond will continue to feel magnetic, but it will always be fueled by emotional imbalance rather than mutual wholeness. The push-pull cycle between the avoidant and the super empath is one of the most emotionally draining yet magnetically charged dynamics in human relationships. It begins innocently enough, two people connecting on a deep level, drawn together by an inexplicable sense of understanding. The avoidant, who normally guards their emotions fiercely, feels a rare sense of comfort in the empath's presence. The super empath, in turn, feels seen and needed in a way that activates their nurturing instincts. At first, everything flows effortlessly. The connection feels intimate, meaningful, even transformative. But as the emotional intensity grows, the balance begins to shift. For the avoidant, intimacy quickly turns into overwhelm. The closeness that once felt soothing starts to feel suffocating, triggering old fears of dependence or rejection. They begin to withdraw, not out of cruelty, but as an act of self-preservation. This withdrawal is subtle at first. The avoidant might take longer to reply, seem distracted, or emotionally distant. For the super empath, who feels every shift in energy, this change is alarming. Their intuition tells them something is off, and their natural reaction is to fix it. They reach out more, communicate more, give more love, hoping to restore the sense of connection they once had. But the more they pursue, the more the avoidant retreats. The empath's intensity feels like pressure to the avoidant, who now associates the relationship with emotional danger. This creates a loop where each person's coping mechanism triggers the other's fears. The avoidant's withdrawal makes the empath feel abandoned, and the empath's pursuit makes the avoidant feel trapped. In this dynamic, both are acting out old emotional patterns. The avoidance instinct to pull away is rooted in a history where closeness once led to pain, perhaps from inconsistent caregiving, betrayal, or emotional neglect. Their mind equates distance with safety. The empath's instinct to chase comes from an equally deep wound, the belief that love must be earned through effort, patience, and understanding. So they chase not because they are needy, but because they fear that letting go means losing love forever. It's a psychological dance where both partners are trying to protect themselves while unintentionally hurting each other. This push-pull rhythm becomes addictive because it mirrors the brain's reward and withdrawal system. The moments of reconnection after distance feel euphoric, almost like emotional relief. The avoidant comes back just enough to soothe the empath's fears, and the empath softens, feeling validated once again. But soon after, the pattern resets, the avoidant begins to feel engulfed, and the cycle of withdrawal begins again. Both become trapped in a loop that feels both painful and irresistible. They mistake intensity for intimacy, not realizing that the highs and lows are symptoms of an unhealed bond, not proof of passion. What makes this cycle so powerful is its unpredictability. The empath never knows when the avoidant will pull away again, and the avoidant never knows how long they can stay before their fear resurfaces. This uncertainty keeps both emotionally hooked, chasing moments of connection that never last. The only way to break free is through awareness, recognizing that love built on fear and control cannot thrive. Until both people confront their internal patterns, the relationship will remain a beautiful but destructive loop of pursuit and withdrawal, connection and escape, longing and loss. The illusion of healing through love is one of the most seductive traps that both the super empath and the avoidant fall into. For the empath, love is not just a feeling, it's a mission. They believe that if they can love someone hard enough, purely enough, they can melt their walls, rewrite their pain, and help them finally feel safe. When they meet the avoidant, who shows glimpses of vulnerability beneath layers of detachment, the empath's heart lights up. They see potential, the hurt child behind the defensive adult, the softness behind the silence. To the empath, this becomes an emotional project. They interpret the avoidant's struggle as an opportunity to bring healing through understanding, patience, and unconditional affection. But in doing so, they unknowingly step into a role that drains their own emotional reserves. The avoidant, meanwhile, doesn't consciously seek to be healed. They don't even fully understand the depth of their emotional wounds. Yet, they are drawn to the empath because the empath offers something no one else ever did: acceptance without judgment. For the avoidant, this is intoxicating. it feels like redemption. The empath's steady love temporarily silences their inner critic and soothes their emotional turmoil. However, this external comfort doesn't replace the inner work that true healing requires. The avoidant begins to rely on the empath's love as a form of emotional anesthesia, a way to feel whole without confronting the pain that created their avoidance in the first place. The empath mistakes this dependence for progress. They see the avoidant opening up slightly, being affectionate for brief moments, or expressing emotion sporadically, and they interpret these flickers as signs of transformation. They tell themselves, "It's working. My love is helping them heal." But what's really happening is that the avoidant is temporarily soothed by the empath's emotional availability, not actually growing from within. As soon as the empath withdraws or sets boundaries, the avoidant's old fears resurface, proving that the healing never truly took root. The empath, seeing this regression, blames themselves for not loving enough, not being patient enough, not trying hard enough, and so the cycle deepens. The tragedy in this illusion is that both individuals believe they are giving love, when in truth they are perpetuating their wounds. The empath is not truly loving, they are rescuing, and the avoidant is not truly receiving love, they are escaping from their pain through it. Healing through love sounds romantic, but it's built on imbalance. The empath is pouring from an empty cup, and the avoidant is drinking from it without learning to fill their own. Over time, the empath becomes emotionally depleted, confused as to why their pure intentions don't yield lasting change. The avoidant, meanwhile, grows increasingly dependent on the empath for comfort, yet resentful of the closeness that comfort brings. True healing cannot be borrowed from another person's emotional strength. It requires turning inward, confronting one's own fears, and learning to self-soothe. Love can inspire healing, but it cannot do the healing. Until both the empath and the avoidant recognize this, they will continue mistaking intensity for progress and dependency for devotion, forever searching for wholeness in a place it was never meant to be found. The path to true connection between the avoidant and the super empath begins only when both individuals turn inward rather than outward. The avoidant must face their fear of intimacy, and the empath must face their fear of abandonment. As long as these fears remain unexamined, the relationship will stay trapped in a cycle of longing and retreat, closeness and distance. For the avoidant, love has always felt like a battlefield between desire and danger. They crave closeness but associate it with loss of control. They were often conditioned to believe that vulnerability leads to rejection or engulfment, so they built walls disguised as independence, yet deep down they ache for the very intimacy they avoid. For the empath, love is tied to a deep sense of responsibility. They believe their value lies in how much they can give, heal, or hold together. So they stay even when it hurts, believing that endurance is the price of love. But true connection cannot thrive when one person is running from closeness and the other is afraid to stop chasing. Healing begins when the avoidant learns to sit with the discomfort that intimacy brings. It's not about forcing openness, but about recognizing that fear doesn't mean danger. It means growth. When the avoidant starts to notice their patterns, pulling away when things feel good, shutting down when emotions rise, they can begin to replace avoidance with awareness. Every moment they stay present through discomfort, they teach their nervous system that love doesn't have to mean suffocation. Likewise, the empath must learn that love doesn't require endless sacrifice. Their task is to understand that stepping back isn't abandonment, it's self-respect. When the empath learns to set emotional boundaries, they reclaim their sense of worth from being the healer. They start to realize that someone else's brokenness is not their burden to fix. True connection emerges only when both people can exist as whole individuals rather than complementary wounds. The avoidant learns to open without fear, and the empath learns to give without depletion. This kind of love isn't rooted in dependency or intensity, it's rooted in calm. It feels less like a fire and more like sunlight, steady, nourishing, and mutual. To reach that point, both must take responsibility for their inner worlds. The avoidant has to heal their attachment wounds, often by revisiting the moments in childhood where closeness was unsafe. They must learn to self-regulate, to comfort themselves without needing distance. The empath, too, must explore the origins of their compulsion to fix others, understanding that it stems from the pain of feeling unseen or unworthy unless they're useful. When both partners begin this internal work, the dynamic between them transforms. The relationship shifts from a battlefield of emotional needs to a space of conscious choice. They can love each other not out of fear, but out of freedom. The avoidant no longer runs from connection, and the empath no longer chases it. Instead, they meet in the middle, each bringing emotional balance instead of emotional debt. That's where real intimacy lives, not in rescuing or running, but in staying grounded enough to let love exist without fear. In the end, the dance between the avoidant and the super empath is not a story of villains or victims, but of two souls trying to find safety in love while carrying the weight of old wounds. True healing begins the moment both stop chasing completion in each other and start building peace within themselves. Love is not about rescuing or retreating. It's about growing together, consciously and courageously. Thank you all for listening, for reflecting, and for allowing this message to remind us that the deepest connection we can ever create starts with the one we build inside our own hearts.